Two names we are not talking about nearly enough.
You are Locked On Terps, your daily podcast on the Maryland Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everyone? I'm Tre Moore, host of Locked On Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So thank you for making us part of your day. And now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial on NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. There are two names for Maryland football that I don't think that we are talking about nearly enough. Two players that I haven't talked about a lot, two players that I haven't seen a lot about. But after some reports that Coach Locksley came out with when he did some of his interviews, it was interesting to hear about two players that I think are going to be huge for Maryland football and are in really important positions and can really get us to the next level in terms of a football team. And those two names are Andre Roy and Octavian Smith. I've not really talked about Andre Roy at all. I think a lot of it was because I honestly thought that Isaiah Wright was going to be the starting left tackle. I thought the transfer out of Buffalo was going to be our starting tackle. I thought that he was in position. I thought he was the best player. I thought that he was probably our best option to be that tackle. And I thought he had a lot of experience starting at Buffalo, and he had done some really good things over there. But of course, all of you guys know that Isaiah Wright is now out for the season with a leg injury. And so I'm looking at the Maryland roster before, and I'm talking about, the offensive line is looking iffy now with Isaiah Wright. We could definitely struggle, and a lot of that still may be true. You don't really know until the actual game starts, especially across the offensive line. Until the game start, it's all a big question mark, but in the offensive line, that's one of the biggest question marks, no matter how you think it's going to look until the actual game starts, especially when you're getting 5 new starters like the Terps are. But I felt pretty decent about Isaiah Wright coming in, but I felt concerned with him being injured, and I didn't know if Maryland's depth was going to be good enough, if some of the other players were going to be good enough. But Coach Locksley has said that Andre Roy has looked really good in camp. The redshirt sophomore has looked really good in camp for Maryland football, which is really interesting, which is a really big kind of thing. So for one, it sounds like he's going to take over that left tackle spot, which puts us in a really good spot. If he's been playing really well at camp, and he's looked really well in the summer and heading into our first game against UConn, and he's done some really big things, that's a really big deal. First of all, you could argue that besides quarterback, left tackle might be the most important position on your offense and on your entire football team. If you struggle at tackle, either tackle spots, but specifically left tackle, especially when you have a right-handed quarterback, which most of these quarterbacks are, when you struggle at left tackle, that makes everything harder for the quarterback. That's the blind side. You could really have an argument, and I would say it's a top 3 position on your football field. You probably would have to say quarterback 1 for sure. Not probably, you would. And then after that, left tackle might be second. And so I talked about it. Isaiah Wright being out, and that could really hurt us because he was supposed to be our left tackle, and I wasn't sure about the depth. But the fact that Coach Locksley says that Andre Roy has been one of the biggest storylines of camp, and that he looks to be taking a huge jump, basically, is a really big thing. He said he would be one of my stars of camp thus far. And Dre has kept his mouth shut, and he's managed the emotional part of the game from a maturity standpoint. So the fact that we have a kid that hasn't played a ton, appeared in 6 games in 2023, but he's a redshirt sophomore, and so he hasn't played a ton for Maryland football. And when he has played, it hasn't been anything special. But the fact that it sounds like Andre Roy has taken a jump and he's ready for that tackle spot is big for Maryland football. If he can play well on the offensive line and he can play like a good tackle, that's a huge thing, because now we might have our starting left tackle for the next 2 years. And so that could be a really big thing. We could have him, or actually, I guess you would say the next 3 years, because he's a redshirt sophomore. So we would get him this year, of course, and then we would get him 2 years after that as a junior and a senior. And so if you can lock down that spot for the next 3 years on your football team, that's a pretty big deal for Maryland football. And that's huge. And for you to be able to get a starting left tackle that's played really well. And he's a guy that we haven't really talked about, but ever since Coach Locke mentioned him, I said, I got to talk about him and the importance that he could be on our football team. But he sounds like he's going to be the starting left tackle. And it sounds like he's been one of the biggest surprises of fall camp. And it sounds like things are just clicking for him. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes things just click right at different times for different players. That's just how it works in terms of athletics and football, basketball, whatever sport it is. When you're playing at that high of a level, sometimes it takes a while, but it'll click at certain times. So I think that's big. And the other thing that was really, really, really interesting is Coach talking about Octavian Smith. And I thought, okay, maybe Shalik Knotts is our number 3 receiver, because some weird things have been going on with Octavian Smith, but I wasn't sure. Saw Octavian Smith play with the second team offense in the spring game, and I hadn't heard a lot about him. But then Coach Loxley brought up Octavian Smith and says he's been really pleased with Octavian Smith. But the other thing he mentioned was he didn't put himself in the best position this summer and dealt with a lot of different issues that kind of put him behind the 8 ball. That's what Coach Loxley had to say. But apparently he's worked his way out of it. So Octavian Smith has clearly picked it up. And he's another guy that's a huge deal for Maryland football, because he changes this offense. He's explosive. He may be the fastest cat out there. I mean, I know Ty Felton always says he's the fastest receiver, but in my head, I always thought it was Octavian Smith. And what he can bring in terms of a downfield ability, in terms of a playmaking ability, in terms of his talent and his explosiveness, is a really big development for Maryland football. And it wasn't like he was quiet, because I looked at him in the spring game going against the second defense, and I'm like, okay, like, why isn't this kid on our first team offense? He's been a top 4 receiver the last year for us, and he did big things and had a couple of solid games, Octavian Smith did. And so I was like, okay, what's going on here? He's burning our second corners. It's like, why is he playing against the second string guys? And so I didn't know, but apparently there's some trouble that he was getting into overall. So it sounds interesting what was happening with the with Octavian Smith, but it sounds like now he's another name that I haven't talked about a ton, and I feel like people aren't talking about him a ton, but he's a guy that's really important to this football team, because I do believe he's our 3rd receiver. I believe he can play the slot position. I also believe you can put him outside and he can run some streaks down the field. If there's not a safety back there, or if it's single high, he potentially can stretch down the field and make plays that we need him to make. And that I've seen Cameron Edge and I've seen some of these other quarterbacks, Billy Edwards on the Maryland Instagram, make some big passes to guys down the field. And I don't know how much of a downfield passing attack we'll have, but if we're going to have one at all, Octavian Smith is going to be a huge part of it. And I have always thought of him as probably our 3rd best receiver on this team. And so the fact that he'd been quiet and I hadn't heard about him and that I wasn't even talking about it a lot was really weird, because I just wasn't sure. I mean, I've mentioned his name for sure sometimes, but I've talked about it. A receiver's going to have to step up outside of Ty Felton, outside of Caden Prather. Teams are going to game plan around those 2 guys that have potential to be all Big Ten types of players again. But Octavian Smith is a guy that has a chance to put himself in position to be, in 2 years, our best receiver possibly, and so does Shalik Knotts. So those guys are extremely important for Maryland football, and I think those guys are going to step up to the plate and do well And I think Octavian Smith, the fact that he's been playing well is important. And I think he's a guy that we haven't talked about enough for Maryland football. What are the biggest questions of fall camp, and are they being answered? I'll talk about that after this ad from FanDuel. You've heard us talk about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we have something a little different for you. And now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get 3 weeks free trial of NFL Sunday tickets from YouTube and YouTube TV. I'm not going to lie, you guys, you have to take advantage of that. All you have to do is pay $5 on a bet and you get 3 weeks of free trial on NFL Sunday ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. I know some of you guys are like me on NFL Sunday. You like to have 5-6 games. Well, YouTube TV allows you to have that multi-box up on your TV. So then you will have a YouTube TV base plan. You'll be able to watch every single regular season Sunday afternoon or out of market game. And all you need is Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com to look at odds to include. So make sure you guys go on and visit FanDuel. What are the biggest question marks of fall camp for the Terps? What are some of the big things that I think are questions that have been going on, and have they really been answered yet? I think the one question that everyone's talking about is the quarterback battle. Probably talk about it more tomorrow in depth, but Coach Loxley's keeping his cards really close. And obviously the question with that is, who is the starter? And to be honest, I don't know anymore. For a while, I was pretty confident in saying MJ Morris, but as we keep going, I do feel like MJ should be the starter, but I still really don't know who it's going to be. I expect an announcement in the next week or so, especially going into game week against UConn, because when you think about it, a lot of it's going to be who's getting the first team reps going into UConn. That's going to be actually important. Maybe less so against UConn, but headed into week 2 against Michigan State, we're going to need our guy to get first team reps. And when we do scout team and all these different teams, we want one quarterback play with the first team offense, and everybody can't get reps. That's just the way it is. But I think that Cameron Edge has made the decision harder. I think it's closer. I think they all three have probably played around just decent football, where no one's probably been amazing and no one's been bad. But I think it's a tough decision, but it just sounds like Coach Loxley's keeping his cards close, and he's not going to really give a leadoff or potential look at who's a starter until he's ready to announce it. And so I'm waiting for him to announce that and to see what that kind of allows this Maryland team to be. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how he announces it and when he announces it, and how he kind of formulates that response. I really do think it could be. I really just don't know anymore. It just feels way closer than you would think it is. And so we'll see. I still think MJ Morris is the favorite, but I think it's going to be extremely interesting to see potentially. Another big question mark was along the offensive line, which is something that we kind of just touched on. It's still a huge, huge question mark. Hasn't been answered whatsoever. I think the one thing is that kind of has been answered about is the fact that Andre Roy looks to be the starting left tackle, but still with Josh Kaltenberger, allow Bow from Georgia to transfer, Alan Heron at right tackle potentially. I think still everyone's asking, will this line be any good? And that's something that I'm not sure about how the line will look. But I do think the fact that Andre Roy has sounded better, I think that's a huge development. But I still think it's a big question mark of fall camp. And I'm not exactly sure how it's going to play out, but I don't think it's been answered yet. Now, question mark that I think has been answered a little bit is about the tight end room, which sounds like it's going to be interesting. And so it sounds like the Maryland tight end room is deeper than we originally thought. So it sounds like, of course, Preston Howard and Dylan Wade are two guys that we like a lot, that we think are going to be really good players for us next year. They still have some question marks in terms of their youth and all those different things, but it does sound like the depth in that room has been a lot better. So Leon Houghton was originally came into Maryland as more of a receiver. Sounds like he's been playing a lot of tight end, and it sounds like he is doing a lot of good things at tight end now. If you can look at the website, he's listed as a tight end now. He was originally a receiver, and he's a guy I talked about before, and now he's a tight end. So I think there's some depth in that tight end room with not only Leon Houghton, but also A.J. Sinitsky, who also has the potential to be a decent player. So I feel a lot better about those two guys, and then Lerone Husbands as well. So we feel a little bit better about the depth in that tight end room. So I do think it's been answered a little bit. Leon Houghton's interesting as a tight end because he's still a little bit small, at only listed at 227 as a tight end. You probably want him a little bit heavier than that. But I do think that it is an interesting kind of matchup with Leon Houghton just because of what he can bring in the passing game. So that could be something that's a really interesting kind of intriguing part of the team, because when you look at it, we think about Dylan Wade and we think about Preston Howard. Yeah, we like those two a lot, but Leon Houghton could bring in another dimension, and same could AJ Sinitsky, who I think is also a good player. So I do think the tight end depth has been worked out some. I'm not going to say that it's like we have elite depth and everything's perfect up there, but I do think the question mark of what happened in case of injury has been kind of figured out. I think it's Leon Houghton, and I expect Leon Houghton to get some snaps there because apparently he's been playing really well. And then as well as AJ as too will also be a guy that is a depth piece in that room, and then Lerone Husbands as well. So I do think we're about 5 deep now. It's not like 5 guys that are all Big Ten types of players, but it's 5 guys that are pretty solid players. So I feel like the depth up there has been kind of figured out a little bit. And then another one that's been a slight question, I've kind of always assumed this, but it does sound like Glendon Miller will be starting at safety. A lot of people ask the question, where is Glendon Miller going to be playing? Will he be playing slot again? I saw somebody DM me that the other day, and I was like, I'm pretty sure Glendon Miller is going to be back at safety. It doesn't sound like he'll be playing slot unless things don't go well at the beginning of the season. But I think Glendon Miller will be back at safety with Dante, and I really like that duo. And I think that duo is going to create a lot of good things for Maryland football. So I do think that Glendon Miller will be a safety officially for Maryland football. A couple of Terps have played really well in the NFL, and one I think should make an NFL roster. I'll talk about that after this ad from eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships, and is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're in the speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. For all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. So a couple of Maryland players played really well in preseason, but I want to focus on 2 guys. Really specifically one, but I do want to mention first, let's get this out the way. Jayshon Jones had a huge catch in the preseason game. It was like over 60, 70 yards to get into the end zone. It was his only catch of the game, but to get a bomb like that in a preseason game is pretty cool for a guy like Jayshon Jones, who has been doing some decent things, it sounds like, in the Vikings camp. I don't think he'll make the roster, will make the 53, but he's a guy who I think has a chance to kind of put himself on the practice squad. Yeah, it was a 71-yard touchdown from Jaron Hall. It was just cool to see Jayson Jones catch a bomb like that, and it's cool to see how he's been playing pretty well at Vikings camp. And I do think that he won't make the 53, but I do think that he has a chance at potentially being on the practice squad. It's just really hard to make the 53-man roster, especially the Vikings. They have a lot of really good receivers, so it's never easy to make that kind of roster. But I do think if you're on the practice squad, you're in position to potentially get the call up and show what you can continuously do. But I do think that he did some good things at Vikings camps, which is nice to see. Now, a guy that should make the roster, and he should make the 53, Bo Braid has been playing so well at Ravens camp. And I think when I look at Bo Braid, I say multiple people made a mistake, because I don't know why he wasn't drafted. I still don't really understand it, but he looks like he's on a mission to prove a lot of people wrong. One coach had already said that he really liked Bo Braid's game, and that he was playing well, and he's been a surprise of camp. And then for him to go into the game, and he had an interception, but it was taken away because of a penalty that had nothing to do with the interception, as well as he led the Ravens in tackles in the preseason game. He forced a fumble in the other preseason game, his first preseason game, on special teams. I think he's a guy that could really push to make that Ravens 53. I think he has a great chance to make it, and I'm gonna go ahead and say he should make that 53-man roster. Obviously, the Ravens are known for having good defenses. They always seem to have a top defense in the NFL, but I think Bo Braid's in that conversation to say he's a young guy, and I mean, he has that going for him. He's a young guy, and so they're going to prefer to keep younger guys on the team, and I think he has a chance to do that. But I also think he's versatile. I saw some Ravens people in the comments talking about Bo Braid and saying how versatile he is, and I think he is, and I think that helps when you think of a guy that you want to keep on your 53-man roster. You don't want to keep a safety that, okay, he can run stop, but he's not really good in pass coverage, and he's not really good in playing different parts of the field, but he can come up and stop the run, or a guy vice versa. You don't want a guy that can only stop the pass, and he's decent in zone coverage and whatever, but we never are going to have him up in the box. You don't want a guy like that. Bo Braid's good all over the field, can come up. He can not pass protect, excuse me. He can play zone coverage. I've seen him play man. I've seen him do all these different things. I've seen him hit really hard. And so I look at a guy like Bo Braid as a guy that I'm like, he's versatile. Like, you want to keep those types of guys if you're the Ravens. And originally, we can't forget, he was supposed to go in like the 4th or the 5th round of the NFL draft, and somehow we just ended up going undrafted. I don't know if he just didn't test well, if he didn't look great at Maryland's pro day or whatever it was, but he is a guy that probably should have went at least in the first, I think he should have gone probably 6th or 7th round at the very least. And if he was a draft pick, he'd for sure be on the roster right now. But the fact that he's an undrafted free agent makes it harder to make the roster. But I do think that he has a real chance, and he probably has the best chance out of any of the undrafted guys on the Maryland team, last year that are in NFL camps, to really make the team. I really do think that he should make it. I think he deserves to make it. And I think at the very least he's on the practice squad. I think there's no chance he's not on the practice squad. And injuries happen in the NFL. They do. And I don't hope the Ravens players get injured at all, but I would love Bo Braid to see an opportunity somehow. And I also think he plays special teams. He's played some at Maryland. That's where he forced his fumble in the first game, was on special teams. And that's another big thing. If you want a guy in your 53, he's got to play special teams if he's not a starter. And so I think Bo Braid plays special teams. So he's a guy that I think should get on the field and figure out ways to help you win. But it's not easy to make NFL rosters. It's just not, especially a roster as caliber as the Ravens. And so I think he's going to have opportunities, though. And I think when you have a good preseason like that, you line yourself up for different things. That's all we have for today. Thank you for listening to Locked on Terps. Make sure you like and subscribe. We're here every day talking Maryland football and basketball. So thank you for listening to Locked on Terps.